Hey guys, Coach here. Thanks for joining this week. Hey, this week we are going to address, based on a couple of comments that I got the past 2 weeks, we're going to address landscape problems. We're going to address the big 5 that I know about, and I invite you to send me an email or drop a comment. If there's one in here that really is causing you some grief, drop me a comment or an email and allow me to help you out with it. So I'm glad you're here. Let's get rolling. Thanks again for being here. Hey, I'm Matt. You can call me Coach. Every Friday I bring with me landscape DIY education, concepts and theories, ideas and solutions so you guys can go out and tackle a landscape project yourself, get professional results, save a whole lot of money in the process, and in this day and age be a lot more self-reliant. Man, after a 20-plus year career in the green industry, I'm bringing with me a lot of knowledge and experience that I want to share with you guys, the new, modern, educated, self-reliant homeowner of today. So for the most part, this channel has been how to design, how to construct, how to maintain your landscape with various facets of all that's involved. I haven't really got into a lot of problem solving so much, and that's what this one is all about. The big 5 headaches that some DIY homeowners face in the landscape and what you can do to identify and resolve those issues. So as always, I appreciate your attention. Stick with me throughout this because you're going to learn, as we do every week, you're going to learn a lot of information and some problem solving this week's video. Let's talk about those big 5 issues that rear their ugly heads when oftentimes people don't expect them. Number one is the drainage system or no drainage system that people have. And number 2 is the irrigation system. Not everybody has one, but those who do, sometimes they can be a pain in the butt. Number 3, the soils that you have. The soils that you have can be very problematic. How you can overcome that to a certain degree. Number 4 is the plant health. Do you have a healthy, viable, thriving landscape? Or do you got one that's just kind of ticking along a little bit at a time and it just doesn't look very healthy? And finally, the big 5, pests and diseases. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk about drainage. Out of all the insurance companies in the world, out of all the contractors and handymen in the world, I'll bet you one of the number 1 problems that any home dwelling ever suffers is water damage of one kind or another. Now, a drainage system starts at the construction of the house itself or an add-on to the construction of the house, and that is the gutters itself. Good quality functioning gutters are a real home saver when it comes to getting water into a channel, into a mechanized delivery system, and then evacuated away from your dwelling so that you don't end up with ponding, splashing, pooling, etc. Drainage systems are a mechanical DIY project that any homeowner can do with a little bit of knowledge ahead of time, a little bit of common sense, and the right tools. I'll tell you what, mechanized drainage systems, removing water from in and around your house, will guarantee you the ability to use your yard a lot more, not have standing and pooling water, getting water away from your dwelling on your land that is not needed for irrigation purposes. Not having one, not having gutters, and not having a drainage system, you're totally reliant on grade. And grade and slope in a drainage system they work hand in hand. They are congruent. And if you don't have good grading and water just wants to sit at your foundation or come off your roof eaves and splash back up on your siding, year after year after year, that can lead to problems. And those repairs can cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And dealing with insurance companies is not exactly what I roll out of bed on a Monday morning and wanting to make that phone call. They're just hard to deal with sometimes. A drainage system has to be placed correctly the first time. Remember, it's going to be buried and it's going to be out of sight. And oftentimes that's the biggest problem with most homeowners is once it's out of sight, it also tends to be out of mind. And it's like any other functioning system in your home. You're not gonna let your car go 30,000 miles without an oil change. Yeah, you're not gonna go 5 years without changing the filters in your HVAC system. Same thing goes for your drainage system outside. That kind of thing is going to need to be put in correctly and then maintained at least once a year, if not twice a year, depending on where you live and when the water comes and goes. I mean, out here in the West, most of the time, I think God's really mad at the West Coast. Most of the time, it's raining right now in March, and grasses are growing and water's flowing. When it does rain, most people out here in the West have gutters and they do have a drainage system. Unless you're perched on a real steep hillside and water just shoots off and doesn't stick around very often. But for the most part, where I practiced in the Central Valley of Northern California, they needed drainage systems and they had to be done right. They had to be sloped just correctly so you got the right flow, but the pipes were still underground, and you went back and serviced them in the springtime and in the fall time, making sure your gutters were clean, make sure the pipes are clean. If you get a clog, they're generally easy to remove, provided that it hasn't been a multi-year clog and you've got water gurgling back up at your downspouts or even worse. So, what are those remedies? Remove the problem, unclog it, or reinstall it. Those are your three choices. Reinstalling it is the last one we want to do. So most of the time, we need an internal camera to be put up inside the pipe and have the professional, maybe a plumber, visualize and see the problem. They could probably take care of it with just a hydrojet application or maybe a rotary cutter, and it's all said and done and you're back in business. Rodents, if you leave the terminal ends open, rodents can get up in there, they can build nests during the dry season, and those can become clogs as well. Those are easily removed, with either digging it up or once again flooding it out and causing a nice flow and get rid of the mousey and his housey. I just said that, didn't I? You did. I did. The mousey and its housey. Drainage systems come in either gravity drain or mechanical sump drains, and those attention to maintenance issues and keeping that thing just as good as when it was installed is really paramount. If you are buying a home that already has an existing system, make sure you have that thing inspected and looked at. Whether you got it during escrow inspection or you had it done after you took possession. You don't want to wake up in the rainy night and wake up to a flooded backyard because the drain system's all clogged and you didn't know it. So if you do have it, maintain it. If you need to fix it, get on it. And then once it's flowing, you'll be surprised at how your yard and your landscape is usable 12 months out of the year. If you're installing one the first time, take a few minutes and learn how to do it. Learn about slope in the trenches. Learn about proper placement of the drain boxes so it actually captures water and the drain box isn't sitting this high above grade, which I have seen lots of times. And make sure that you provide some type of landscape filter or something over your drain box so it doesn't get all sediment filled and start the process of filling up. All right, moving on, let's talk about irrigation. Not everybody has irrigation systems. I've traveled this country and this continent quite a bit, and I've seen probably about 50% of the homes have a supplemental irrigation system. Out here in the West, they're almost standardized because you just don't get rain for 8 months out of the year, and you have to supplemental water. It's pretty common. But back east, some of the parts of the Midwest, upper Midwest, they're optional because there's so much water falling out of the sky throughout the growing season, they really don't need to have it. But if you do have it, you got to take care of it. So addressing the irrigation system based on 3 or 4 things: need, coverage, type, and performance. And I'll touch on those briefly, each one of them. The need. What kind of need do you need to have for your irrigation system? Is it something that you live in North Carolina, but you haven't had rain in 3 weeks and the lawn is starting to dry up a little bit? That kind of need? Or do you live out in Sacramento, California, and you need to start watering now in March, in the beginning of March, because there hasn't been any. Coverage. Coverage basically means, does the system and each zone in your irrigation system cover that particular area of the landscape adequately? Adequately in the amount of spray and throw that those pop-up heads have. The drip system, is it timed correctly and is it working correctly so that it delivers drip irrigation water to the plants you have at a rate that makes sense for those plants, not only in age, but also in amount. The type of system you have. Basically out west it's all about supplemental irrigation. You either have a spray system or you have a drip system, plain and simple. And finally, performance. Are all the elements of that irrigation system working? From the timer on the wall, outside or inside, to the valves, to the pipe, to the water delivery system at the end, being a pop-up spray or an emitter on a drip system. All these components have to be working and working well so that your coverage and your performance is perfect. You know, an automatic irrigation system is one of those systems that can really free up a heck of a lot of time for a homeowner, especially an automated one that comes on and goes off without a hitch. Imagine how many minutes and hours that really frees up so that you're not out there dragging a hose around and resetting an oscillating sprinkler or watering plants by hand at the end of a hose like our grandparents did. But in order for those things to all do the job that you want it to, you're going to have to take a few minutes every once in a while, probably 3 times a year, to go out and do a walkthrough. An irrigation walkthrough can show you a surprise before it becomes a big disaster. Maybe you have a cracked head that doggo running up and down the fence line hit. Or maybe the kids tripped over a lawn sprinkler, or maybe hubby hit it with the edger and really messed up the screw-in nozzle at the top of a pop-up spray. Turning those zones on one by one, right at the valve itself, and then walking through that and making sure everything works is a great way, a great insurance policy to avoid any sort of problems. Then go to your timer, turn it to manual, start each zone for 1 minute at a time, and then scurry around and check each and every one, making sure that that timer is activating each and every valve. Another thing about irrigation systems is you. You as the homeowner. Knowledge is power, and if you know about your system, what components are out there, what zones feed what area. I recently helped a friend not too long ago, and they didn't know where zone 1 watered. Well, we did a walkthrough, and we turned it on manually. And she wrote down where zone 1 was all the way through zone 6. Now she knows. Now we went back in and we reprogrammed a horribly out of timed automatic timer. And we probably saved her 2/3 of the amount of water that she is currently using. Now she's a lot more drought conscious, and she's saving water on her water bill every month. And you can do that too. And I know what some of you are out there saying. I don't know, Coach, I don't know crap about sprinklers. I don't know anything about timers. I don't know, you know, if my car breaks down, Coach, I just take it to the mechanic. So what can I do here? Well, there's 2 things you can do. You can hire a professional at a great deal of cost to come in and inspect it and do any repairs that might be needed. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It lined my wallet for many, many years. The other thing you can do is just become a little more self-reliant. And maybe you don't want to, or maybe you can't for one reason or another, fix it yourself. But if you know the components you have and you do hire a professional, you probably won't get taken to the cleaners quite as bad, because you'll recognize what needs to be done and what doesn't because you know it. But maybe you have a physical handicap and you can't get out there and do that kind of work anymore. It's okay, but you do have the knowledge of what you have, how it works, when it comes on, when it goes off, and that is what is really going to set you apart as a homeowner compared to the person that doesn't know dookie. So when doing those walkthroughs, first we're going to inspect. We're going to start at the timer. Is the timer on? Does it have a backup battery that has been changed at least once a year, just like a smoke alarm? We're going to look at the wiring connections, making sure the common wire is in and all the zone wires are all properly placed, properly secured. Then you're going to go outside and make sure that the wires at the valves, they all have their little Scotch locks on them or whatever you have. They're taped up nice and neat. They appear to be nice and tight. And the wires leading to the valves, the solenoid wires, are they in good shape? Are they in good shape? There's no breaks, there's no cracks, one isn't broken off right at the solenoid, which I've seen lots of times. How about the solenoids themselves? I think there's probably a lifespan of 7 to 12 years on those things if they're taken care of. And they can be easily switched out by just unscrewing them. Turn off your water first. You can unscrew a bad solenoid and put a new one back on there without any problem, and then rewire it to the proper wires. Pretty easy to do. Look at the valves themselves. Are they dripping, leaking, cracking? Do they have all kinds of algae running off them? Do you have a pool of water underneath the valve assembly? A big indication of either cracked pipes or leaking valves. And I see that a lot when we have surprise super cold weather, especially in the fall. And the valves tend to freeze up a little bit and cause a crack, an expansion crack. And then things thaw out and all of a sudden you got this psst water spray that's coming out that you don't understand. Where in the hell did that come from? Oftentimes that's where it comes from. Valve replacements at a professional level can cost you anything from $80 to $280 depending on the complication. And you can switch those things out yourself. Plenty of places on YouTube to learn exactly how to switch out a valve, an existing valve. It's not really hard. You just have to be patient and measure twice, cut once. Okay, then going out into your terminal part of your irrigation system, you're going to look at each heads, the pop-up heads in the lawn, maybe the shrub heads on the gray Schedule 80 risers. You're going to look at the nozzles. You're going to look at, if you have a drip system, turn it on and check each emitter, making sure it's flowing. Undo the filter that's on your drip system and check it. It should be crystal clear. You can rinse it out, wash it, and put it back in for each zone that's on a drip system. That way your filter is working really well and your emitters down at the terminal end don't get all clogged up with calcium and other stuff that we see. And finally, are all the emitters on your drip system working? You can pull them back up as the zone is on, and you can see ones that are going dink, dink, and they're supposed to be going psst. You know, maybe they're a 5 gallon an hour emitter, and yet all they're doing is one drip at a time. One drip at a, that's not right. It should not be that way. So maybe you have to go back behind the emitter and cut the 1/4-inch drip tubing, then see what you got. If now all of a sudden you have a steady stream of water coming out, you know there's something wrong with that emitter and it probably needs to be replaced. You can take it and invert it, put the exit back into the tube and back flush it. Sometimes that's all it takes. And then cut that little piece of tubing and reattach, see if that works. If not, replace it, and replace it today. Don't leave it undone, just fix it today and move on. Okay, moving on to soils. Probably one of the biggest things that I did for any of my viewers is the compatibility video that I did last week. Compatibility of your landscape throughout fence to fence. One of the biggest things is soils. Are the plants that you have compatible with the soils that you have? Do you know what kind of soil you do have? Did you ever have it taken and shipped off and analyzed, have it come back and say, hey, you've got a rocky clay soil, or you have a clay loam soil, or you have a sandy soil with a little bit of organic matter, or a sandy loam soil, like what I worked with quite a bit in the Central Valley. Good stuff, but it didn't retain a lot of food for a lot of you. You had to feed it quite a bit. Knowing what kind of soils you have and then matching up your landscape and plant materials to what you have is a very good way to ensure longevity and landscape success as the years march by. You can take the worst soil in the world and you can amend it up with all the amendments and micronutrients and fertilizer you want. But eventually Mother Nature is going to reverse all that and turn it back in to what was originally there, unless you constantly supplement and allow more organic matter to be in and around that soil, breaking down and nutrifying that soil over the months and years. One of the things I see about soils on forums like Reddit, is people have crappy soil, but they're trying to do something with their landscape. Maybe they're replacing the lawn. And there's a lot of bad advice out there about, putting a skim coat layer of topsoil down, watering it in, grading it out, and then seeding or sodding and creating a new lawn. And it is one way of doing it. It is not the best way by any means. Because what you do is you end up with a stratification. You've got this looser, nice, loamy topsoil that you bought on top of, your original rocky clay soil, and there's no incorporation between those layers. So you have this stratification. So the seed comes up, hey, your lawn looks great until the first time it's not raining for 2 weeks, and that skinny little 1.5 or 2 inch layer dries out like that. And whatever water does fall goes through your lawn, hits the hard rocky soil, and does not penetrate. And you end up with a real shallow rooted lawn system. So how do we remedy that? To the best of your ability, incorporate your organic matter, your topsoil, your soil amendments and stuff into that rocky soil or clay soil or whatever you might have, something that you need to correct. Eliminate that stratification. Even if you can only get a couple inches of incorporation, it's better than none. Then you have that 2 inches plus 2 inches of incorporated matter, and now you have a 4 inch root zone that's going to thrive. It's going to do a lot better. And if you can rototill it down 5-6 inches, hey, even better. Then let it firm up, water it in, grade it out, and then move forward. So what do you do about soils that are really crappy? Amending them, making sure that you have a good drainage system, making sure that you have the right irrigation system. They all kind of coalesce together. If you haven't picked up on that yet, one will take care of the other. Okay, moving on to plant health. One of the things about plant health in the ornamental world is sometimes you don't know it's sick until it's checking out, because we don't get out there and we don't inspect and we don't do walk-arounds, and oftentimes one of our prize whatevers all of a sudden is wilting, or all its leaves are dropping off. This is a big indicator. It's like a plant with dropping leaves in the middle of the growing season, evergreen or not, is a sign of illness. It's kind of like chest pains in humans. You just know that something's wrong, and you have to have it diagnosed and looked at. So many times as a nursery professional, I used to have people coming in with a branch or coming in with a few leaves and going, what's wrong with my blah, blah, blah? And I would look at it, ask a few questions, and we could generally figure it out and offer up solutions. Same thing goes for you. I didn't have the internet back in the 70s and the early 80s. There was nothing. You had to know it. You had to know it. You had to be experienced, had to be taught and educated in ornamental horticulture. When I had Weed Patch Ranch, most of the time, as I've spoken to you several times, when I went out, I'd do my walk around, do my weekly maintenance for lawns and whatever, pruning, nipping, tucking, and deadheading. All of that gave me the opportunity to also inspect and assess if there was something wrong and get on it. The number one plant health issue I always saw in other people's yards, and even occasionally my own, is poor settling in the planting hole the plant was put in. If you do not compact that soil underneath that root ball, if you do not firm up that soil in and around that root ball and it settles even an inch or two, you can have the mulch and existing soils from the water basin and stuff start to collapse in and around, the trunk of the tree or the plant, bush, whatever you put in the ground. And that leads to crown rot, and that leads to plant deterioration. And that is generally when you'll see in the middle of 7 perennials that you planted, all of a sudden one isn't doing right. You don't have gophers. It's not being eaten. It's just all of a sudden 6 are doing real well, and number 7 is just kind of like, ugh. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Check the depth. Check the depth. The other most important plant health problem that I used to identify is water. Water is a killer, and water is something that makes it thrive. And most of the time, people overwater. They don't underwater nearly as much. So make sure that you're delivering the amount of water that your plants and landscape needs. Make sure that your plants are compatible with what else is in the same bed. You know, if you have hydrangea and prickly pear cactus, get my point? They're just not compatible. One needs water twice a year, the other needs water 3 and 4 times a week in order to do what it's supposed to do. Plant health problems, you can generally approach it in a couple of different ways. Pruning, feeding, adjusting water in one way or another, more or less, and in some cases, relocating or rotating. Perennials, some plants, some grasses, they just give up the ghost after a while. Maybe they're biennials. One of the best ways to make sure that you have landscape success and your plant health stays 10 out of 10 is knowledge of what plants you have. If you've got 12 to 15 different kinds of plants in your landscape, trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, whatever it is, know them. Read up on them a little bit. You know, occasionally we do have some spare time in our life. You know, if you went around and identified each plant and then you looked it up and you just read a little bit, compare what you read to where the plant is at. Compare what you read to the type of care the plant gets by you and see if everything matches. That's the easiest way. Knowledge is power, so know what plants you have. Okay, number 5, pests and diseases. I could do a 2-week seminar on pests and diseases, but because of time, we're gonna go through some really fast ones. First are animals. Let's talk about pests as far as animals. Deer, squirrels, raccoons, mice, all these kinds of things can kind of wreak havoc with a landscape. Deer especially, you know, they love to come in and take your $40 whatevers and reduce them down to a nub, killing them off. Seen it 100 times. Squirrels love to come in, especially ground squirrels. They'll come in and munch. Gophers are another pest that can come up in a brand new sod lawn after they've been pushed from a developer or empty lot that's getting developed. They'll come over and start taking up residency in your yard because they don't have anywhere else to go. Birds can be a pest. There's nothing more demoralizing than making sure you have a great fruit crop coming in. Maybe it's cherries or peaches or apples or pears or whatever it might be. And you've done everything. You've sprayed, you've pruned, you've thinned, you've done everything. And all of a sudden, about a week before you're ready to harvest and start taking a few of those yummies off the tree, the birds come in and just peck the living hell out of them. And now you got all this, you know, pecked up fruit. Now the ants come in and you look at all your time, labor, and love, and it gets destroyed. Let's talk about solutions. Deer, a good, well-trained doggo. Doggos will keep deer out of the yard. As far as deer fence, there's many good quality vinyl, nylon, 7-foot fences that you can put up around areas that you want to protect. Not always the most sightly, but what choice do you have? As far as birds, there's all kinds of netting out there that you can put up. Make sure that if you think you need a 10 by 10 to cover your peach tree, go 20 by 20. That way you don't have to go buying new stuff, and it's enough to cover all the tree. And then make sure you stake it up so it's not sitting right on the canopy, because the birds will just sit right there on the netting and peck through it. So make sure there's space. If your fruit is sitting here, the netting is way out here and they cannot reach it. Mice and other things, you can get into chemical controls. I'll tell you what, I used to have a cat. That cat's name was Pumpkin. And Pumpkin was named by my kids many, many years ago. That cat was single-handedly the best go-getter when it came to gophers in the yard and mice. That cat would bring up gophers and mice almost on a daily basis, almost year-round. And you know how cats are, they love to play with their food. And that cat would come up to the family room window and throw the mouse, throw the gopher up against the window to get our attention, and then she'd sit there and do it. If you have a real good cat, keep it, because that's probably the single best rodent control you can have. There's chemicals and other things. So is killing everything the answer? No, I don't think you should be out there shooting all the birds. I don't think you should be, you know, using a pellet gun on the deer. But I'm gonna kind of stay away from that topic just a little bit. I'll let you and PETA figure it out. But control is the best answer. Try control first. Now, as far as diseases, disease control goes hand in hand with knowledge of what plants you have. Reading up on what you have can lead you to know what your plants are susceptible to and then identify a disease if it happens to rear its ugly head. And then you'll also know what kind of control to use. For instance, peach leaf curl. Peach leaf curl on peaches, once it's there, it's there. You can try and control it with lightweight copper sprays and stuff, but if you're already coming out into bloom period, you can't use that anymore. So it's all prevention and proper culture in and around the orchard all the time. And that's the best way to control it. But if you get one of those cool spring rainy days and your peaches are pushing out and they're in full bloom and now green is starting to show, it's almost impossible sometimes. It's almost impossible, especially if you have neighbors that have those problems and they've never tried to treat them. Sometimes it will visit you no matter what. But know the plants themselves, know what controls are available out there, and know how to access them correctly and use them correctly. And make sure you always use safety gear when you're spraying and that kind of stuff. There you go, the big top 5 landscape problems that are out there. I know this one's a little long as compared to some of the other ones, but damn it, it's got to be complete. And I don't care about the critics who say it's too long. Well, that's what the fast forward button is for. Hey guys, if you get a chance, thank Coach out just a little bit, show the love, go over to the website, maybe check out the book. Don't forget the 15-step DIY landscape checklist, and of course, the home course, the digital Homescape 1.0. Great educational tool. Also makes great housewarming gifts for those new homeowners that maybe are a little behind the curve as far as how to do stuff. I'll catch you guys next week. Drop me a comment, drop me a like. If you lasted this long, consider subscribing. I'll see you next week. As always, to your landscape success. Bye for now.